we have 3 case studies today, and two presentations on top of that. So quite a um, few talks. So I think we can start with the introduction, Marta. I will stop sharing this introduction screen.
Thank you, Sila. Welcome, everyone. So I'm going to share my screen. So I'm Marta Rivera. I am a member of both the SWIFT project and the Agroecology-TRANSECT project. And together with the people from TRANSECT and from SWIFT, we thought it could be interesting to have this common joint webinar to share some of the thoughts or findings that we are having in terms of gender in agroecology, in particular in the European context, but not only, as you will see later, no? So I'm just making a short introduction of the Agroecology-TRANSECT project and of the SWIFT project, so you can have an idea of what these two projects are about. Both of them are two Horizon Europe projects, so funded by the European Union in the Cluster 6. So both projects are from Cluster 6, but one has a more let's say natural science perspective, but interdisciplinary perspective, but with a stronger focus on the natural science dimension, while the other has a more social science perspective. And I think this combination is very interesting, and I think you maybe have the same opinion when we finish today, but just to show you a little bit of this context, no? So the Agroecology-TRANSECT project, let me see if I can advance. Okay, so the Agroecology-TRANSECT project has its main focus in agroecological practices. No? So it's about agroecology, but it's very much focused on the practices and how agroecology have the potential, no, to reduce, no, the greenhouse gas emissions, to favor climate change adaptation, to promote biodiversity conservation and the socioeconomic resilience of farmers in Europe. And it does this by mobilizing the knowledge in 11 innovation hubs, which are spread across different parts of Europe. It has a participatory methodology, right, in terms of creating a strong interaction through, for instance, co-innovation workshops and direct interaction with the members of the innovation hubs, more in particular with the facilitators of those innovation hubs, right? And one of the things that the project is aiming at is to look at the barriers and the levers to the agroecological transition in the European context, no? So in doing that, the project is, as I say, working with these in 11 innovation hubs with an interesting characteristic is that these innovation hubs are, in terms of the multi-level perspective, no? Theory, no? The fact that they are in different levels of transition regarding the regime, right? So I'm not going to start here to talk about the multi-level perspective, but just to say that in terms of innovations, we have some innovation, normally grassroots or bottom social movements innovation, social innovations, which are very much into the niche. And then while the regime, which is where we all are, is advancing, no, this niche can help to change the regime. And what we have already is that some of these innovation hubs that are part of the Agroecology-TRANSECT project, interestingly, they are in different stages, no, or in different relationships with this regime, no? So some of them are very much in terms of political changes and political focus, and really are into what we are niche, aiming at changing the regime, while others are more anchored into the regime, no? And that provides a very interesting diversity, which is the reality of agroecology in the European context, no? The other, and then there is also another issue, sorry, in the project, which is expanding also beyond these 11 innovation hubs to try to understand dynamics in the European context. And there is this process of collecting other dynamic agroecological systems that right now it is in 89 more experiences, which are located in 23 countries. No? So to address this or to address these objectives of understanding the barriers and levers to the transition, there are different things that have been performed within the project, no, in terms of understanding not these biophysical and socioeconomic conditions, which can promote or make more difficult for implementation of agroecological practices. There is also the identification, no, of what is called in the project recommendation domains, which are places with similar agroecological farming methods where and biophysical and socioeconomic environments where there can be some process of learning and replication. And there also an element more linked to behavioral factors. But one of the things which is super important in this project is that we identify the fact that the definition of what we understand by agroecology is super important. No? And today Raquel and Elena will be mentioning the work performed in Work Package 2, where we can see the aim was to bring different principles that are of agroecology, in particular Nileni principles that have been developed by civil society movements, and to see how these principles can be implemented or not, or they are recognized within the agroecological actors in the European context. No? But by looking at these elements, of course, one of the things that come very strongly, it's the issue of gender. No? And this is what there's one principle in the Nileni principles, which is about equal power and remuneration across genders. And this, of course, raises a diversity of elements that are now discussed within the context of the project. And what about the SWIFT project? SWIFT project already, despite it is in cluster 6, it is about a specific call which already had a focus on gender. No? So the Agroecology-TRANSECT project does not have an explicit focus on gender, but gender emerged as part of the process. No, I mentioned Raquel Elena work, but also we also have Cecilia will present the issue of gender having already identified with the indicators, no, development in the Agroecology-TRANSECT project. No, but the fact is that in the SWIFT project it really responds to a gender call. No, so it has an explicit gender focus. It is a process which is transdisciplinary from the very beginning, so it really responded to the needs of farmers group, in particular to the women articulation of La Via Campesina in Europe, and together with them we developed this project with a diversity of partners that I will present later, but basically with these two main objectives. No, one was to foster transitions towards sustainable, balanced, and inclusive development of rural areas, no? By, on the one hand, favoring this the deployment, and I say here, so-called women-led innovation, because there has been an element of strong discussion. The women-led innovation was the name of the call, no? So this is how it was named within the call. But we conceptualize women-led innovations as grassroots innovations built to challenge structural inequalities in agricultural rural areas, no? In rural areas. And grassroots innovations, by definition, it means network of activists and organizations generating novel bottom-up solutions for sustainable development. No? So this is the actors that we are working with in terms of innovations, and in particular social innovation, which are acting for change. No? So within this multi-level perspective that is common both in both projects, Agroecology-TRANSECT, but also in the SWIFT project, here we are working mainly with the niche experiences, no, that are really aiming to transform, to change the regime. In that case, towards agroecological transformation. Then in the project, we are also aiming, of course, we do have a feminist perspective, including intersectional and based on human rights. And we provide to both theoretical and practical tools to change the framing of policies in Europe to promote sustainable structural and agroecological transformation in our agriculture. No? And to do this, of course, we are focusing, and here there is another element of commonality with TRANSECT, we focus in agroecological approaches in farming since we believe this approach can contribute to gender equality, resilience, and sustainability. So in our project, in the SWIFT project, we focus on feminist agroecology. That is not, I think it's important to clarify this. It is really about redressing unequal gender relations and other intersecting relations of marginalization, including race, class, etc. So it's not only about women. We are also working with migrant farm workers, women farm workers, and we are also working with LGBTQ plus groups of farmers who have already very invisible within the European farming context. And also, it's important that in this feminist agroecology, we recognize the experience are complex, dynamic, pluralistic, and it is not about flattening women's experience in and across the food systems as an experience of victimhood and exploitation, or by position as environmental saviors, no? So really as active actors of change, right? With agency and recognizing the diversity here. So in the project, as in the case of TRANSECT, but here we are working with what we call clusters, no? So the social innovations, and there are different different cases in each of these clusters that are grouped based on the discriminations of women and other social groups, marginalized social groups that we already pre-identified in the preparation of the project, which basically are the issue of the access to means of production, mainly land, which is linked to that, the fact that because they have less access to land and they don't appear officially in the statistics, they have no the right to social security schemes. This also implies the fact that they have then less access to the subsidies from the common agricultural policy. There is the issue of low participation and representation in agricultural organizations, a training that really reflects the needs and the views of women and these actors, more marginalized actors of agriculture, which is more linked to agroecological farming. And then we do have a focus on experiences of mutual support. And then, as I said before, two particular actors that have been well invisibilized in the research, which is migrant farm women farmers and farm workers, and then LGBTQ plus farmers. And then in particular, there is a cluster on Central and Eastern Europe because we identify the fact that there is less work and less evidence to understand the difficulties that in that particular context women face to really generate this type of social innovations and come together to really fight for their rights. No, this I will escape. And just to say some of the expected results, no, in terms of these theoretical and methodological frameworks, we work with the innovative participatory methodologies, aim at presenting some policy proposals that really enhance agroecological practices, but also, of course, gender equality. Propose a database on practical tools, stories. Here you have some example of the photo boys, this will be some podcast, cap gender analysis that Georgia will be presenting today, feminist viability indicators that Judith will be presenting today. So just to give you an introduction of the things that we will be listening today. And that's it. This is what I wanted to mention in terms of introduction. So we are all in the same line regarding what we expect in our meeting.
Thank you, Marta. Okay, we can, I think, jump into Georgia's talk today.
Hi. Okay, so I'll then share my screen. Let's see. Is it working? Can you guys see?
Perfect. Yeah.
Okay, great. So hi, everybody. I'm really excited to be here and share the work we've done with SWIFT. So what I will be presenting today is a feminist analysis of the Common Agricultural Policy and in its latest reform, so the one that is in place from 2023 until 2027. And this is the work of myself, Mariah Van Santen, Jessica Duncan, and Bettina Bock. We're all based in Wageningen, and I'll jump right in. So in terms of the contents, I've kept the structure quite simple. I hope you can follow. So first, I'll go over an introduction of the Common Agricultural Policy. As I know, we might not all be as familiar with it, just very basic one, so we're all on the same page. And then I'll go into our analysis, which is structured according to two components, which I will explain when the time comes. I will be looking at rules about gender and then rules with gendered effects, and it will become clear. And then I'll go over a bit of a discussion, summarize and synthesize, and some policy recommendations. So the Common Agricultural Policy, it's the oldest and most funded European policy in place since 1962. I think right now it takes up just over a third of all EU budget. But when the European Union was created, it used to take up 70%. So it was also a big motivation for the creation of the European Union. It is structured according to two pillars. So the first pillar is direct payments and market measures, and the second pillar is rural development. So for the SWIFT deliverable, so the initial work that we did, we looked at both pillars, but for the sake of time in this presentation, I will only be looking at the first pillar, which is anyway the one that is most funded out of the two. So the CAP is structured according to multiple different goals, 10 specific goals. And then what happens is that the member states, following these guidelines, they draft their own national strategic plans, adjusting to their own national context. So yeah, kind of bringing it to their own level, but still following these general principles. And what's interesting about the latest reform is that gender equality was newly added as a specific policy goal. And here I want to make a bit of a disclaimer that, well, we did a feminist analysis. There was a bit of a tension in that we're working with data that understands gender to be binary. And while we didn't want to reproduce these norms, it was very hard to not do it. So I hope I hope there comes a time where I don't have to make this disclaimer, but we are looking at the effects on women. So I like to start with the screenshot. It's from an older regulation of the CAP, another reform, and it's from 2013 actually, so not super long ago. And you can see that farmers were referred to in the actual policy documents with male pronouns exclusively. And while this bias is no longer as blatantly overt, male bias in agriculture does still persist. So women continue to face difficulty accessing land, training, facing masculine stereotypes, etc. And gender mainstreaming in agriculture has not really lived up to its promises. A quick parenthesis, what I mean by gender mainstreaming is it's a commitment that the EU has made to actually look at every stage of the policy cycle to kind of look at it from a gendered perspective. So in short, during the drafting, but also the implementation, to kind of look at what's in front of you and kind of think about how it might impact persons of different gender differently. So that was kind of a short intro, and now I'll take you over the analysis. And like I said before, it's structured according to two sort of themes. The first one is rules about gender. And by the way, this structure comes from a feminist institutionalist framework, for those interested, but I'm not talking about the theoretical framework, again, due to time restraints. So rules about gender, what are they? They're basically every sort of explicit mention about women or gender in the policy document. So it's quite straightforward. And here I want to clarify that the CAP reform consists of 3 different regulations. In those 3 regulations, only one of them contains any mention of women or gender in it. And in that one regulation that contains them, there are 9 mentions. I think it's like more than a 1,000-page document. But I'm going to take you through what these mentions are. So we first see a mention in the specific objectives of the CAP. Like I said, gender equality made it in there. So specific objective 8 reads to promote employment, growth, gender equality, including the participation of women in farming, social inclusion, and local development in rural areas, including the circular bioeconomy and sustainable forestry. So we see that gender equality did indeed make it in there, but it sits there alongside a multitude of other goals. And research does actually show that gender equality tends to take a backseat to goals of economic growth, which we see listed first here. And actually, there's even a debate about whether these goals can be achieved together, especially in agriculture, where it's heavily reliant on the exploitation of family labor and especially the work of women. So even presenting these goals as kind of, not clashing, is debatable. The next mention is in recital 33. Member states should assess and address challenges to women farmers. And for those of you that don't know, recitals are kind of at the beginning of legal documents, and they're not really binding, but they're more there to state the intention of the policy. So they're not legally binding. And again, phrasing such as should assess kind of push the responsibility onto the member state to implement it. One more slide on the rules about gender. So then we have two more mentions in Article 108 and 106, which talk about how we need to incorporate sex-segregated data in needs assessment where available, highlighting that where available. Article 106 indicates that we should include where relevant gender equality bodies in the drafting of these strategic plans that I mentioned earlier. And then we have Article 123, which is to inform gender equality bodies about the opportunities that the CAP gives for women. And the last one is we have three indicators that measure different aspects of the CAP and have a gender breakdown. And two of these have to do with young farmers. And this is, of course, very important and a big opportunity to kind of bring more women into agriculture. But 2 out of 3 is a big percentage. And actually, if you look at the average age of women farmers in the Netherlands, at least, it's 55 years old. And only 4% of women farmers in the EU are under 35 years old. So yes, important to include and give attention to young farmers and young women. But actually, the majority of women do not fall under that category in agriculture. And one more thing I wanted to say before I move on is, I've highlighted the where relevant and where available, this kind of language. And I want to disclaim that it's not a coincidence. Like, in these documents, every word is the result of heavy negotiation. So it is intentional and worth sort of commenting on. The second part of the analysis is rules with gendered effects. And now, so what is this? So this is rules that, while they don't necessarily mention women and gender, they might, in their implementation, have effects that are different, for men or women or persons of gender diverse. So it would be incomplete to only look at the explicit mentions of women. So what I'll take you through here is 3 different direct payments: the Basic Income Support for Sustainability, or BIS, the Complementary Redistributive Income Support for Sustainability, or CRIS, and the Complementary Income Support for Young Farmers, or CISYF. So who receives direct payments? Before we go into it, I want to give a quick some numbers. So from a report of the European Court of Auditors in 2019, it stated that men received 60% of these direct payments, women 12.5%, and companies 27.5%. And this is interesting when we consider that the European average for farms managed by women is 29% of EU farm managers are women. And while this hides big discrepancies among member states, it does kind of give an indication that the direct payments might not be so equally distributed between men and women. So the first one is the Basic Income Support for Sustainability. It is arguably the most important CAP tool to support farmers and takes up about a third of the total CAP funds. It is paid to farm owners based on the numbers of hectares that they farm. And this means that there's a disproportionate benefit to larger farms. And that's because not only the absolute amount of money that goes to the farmer is larger, but also because larger farms can attain more easily economies of scale, which means that they can lower the cost of cultivation per hectare, and therefore more money sort of goes into their pockets. And again, when we consider farm size differences in Europe, we can understand that this might very well have gendered impacts, as if you look at the average hectares that women and men farm owners manage, women have less than half of the average that men have. For men, it's 14.4 hectares, and for women, 6.4. So the CAP administers payments to farmers, but it doesn't really pay much attention to who is getting the money. Oops, sorry. And then, so I would also like to draw your attention to this interesting article that I found. And it stated that CAP payments have an effect on factors which affect viability. So, for example, without any CAP payments, so say the CAP didn't exist, the effect of the farm size on viability significantly decreases. I needed a moment to process that, but actually I thought this is crazy. It highlights a very unfair present support system. And in the same article, they also said that gender is also associated with a lower viability, although they didn't really explain why that is. It was more of a quantitative study, so it was only one sentence in the article. But I have an idea that maybe some of the content of this presentation might explain the why. So this leads us to the second direct payment, which is the complementary redistributive income support for sustainability, or CRIS. So luckily, the CAP does have some idea, the EU does have some idea that, larger farms are benefiting more. It's not a new measure, but it is a measure that was made mandatory in the 2023 reform. Before then, I think only 10 member states sort of implemented this. And it takes the form of a redistribution of direct payments to small and medium-sized holdings. So member states are obligated to spend a minimum 10% of all direct payments on this specific direct payment. And I'll give you some examples from the Dutch NSP. So for the Netherlands, they set the CRIS at the minimum of 10% for farms up to 40 hectares, which is the Dutch average. But then when you consider it again with the EU average, it's so much higher. And again, because it's based on the size of the farm, those farms closer to 40 benefit a lot more than, say, somebody that has 5 hectares. So then some quotes from the actual NSP, National Strategic Plan, is not to artificially sustain so-called unviable farms, although they're not defined. Keeping the CRIS minimal prevents large farms from being harmed or going backwards, and not investing in sustainable measures. No identified need to redistribute the direct payments. No expectation that the CRIS will stop the trend of farms that keep growing in size. And instead of redistributive payments, education is more helpful intervention to support small farms. So there's a lot of assumptions there, as you can see. Oh, yes. And then that leads me to the last direct payments that I will be presenting.
Yeah?
Sorry?
Sorry.
Someone has their mic on, I think. Anyway, so which is the complementary income support for young farmers. This is funding for young farmers that have newly set up a farm for the first time. And member states can decide between either an annual payment per hectare or annual lump sum. So in the Netherlands, they are doing the lump sum version, which is 2,800 euros. And indeed, a lump sum could be more gender sensitive in that it doesn't have the issue of the other payments, the hectare-based payments, as I explained. But we also need to look at what it means to be a young farmer. So in order to qualify for this payment, you need to fulfill a set of requirements. And this is determined as follows. Okay, an upper age limit set between 35 and 40 years old, okay? Second of all, is a condition for being head of the holding. And third is the appropriate training or skills required as determined by member states. But we know also from the literature that women are much less frequently heads of the holding, and appropriate training in the Netherlands means a diploma of agrarian education or proof of 2 years of experience combined with a course on taking over a farm, farm management, etc. Sorry, 1 second, I need to look at my notes. Well, only 28% of women farmers have received an agrarian education, compared to 82% of Dutch male farmers. And learning spaces, we know from literature, are also very male-dominated, and women are often not included. And here we have an example from in the next slide that I'll show you, the Agrarian Advisory Association in the Netherlands. And it stated that there's a need for objective and impartial advice. But then when you look at the members, it's not a very diverse demographic, let's say. So there's no real specific attention to attracting young female farmers. Although there could have been an opportunity there, it does not address any unequal patterns of inheritance, ownership, and acquisition of agricultural land. And therefore, this specific payment has the potential to reproduce the existing gender gap in agriculture. What I'll present now is not a direct payment, but I really wanted to include it in the presentation as it's something new in the latest reform of the CAP. And while it's not a direct payment, it is a condition for receiving all other direct payments that we talked about. So if a farmer does not comply with this, they can lose all their payments that they receive. And now, what is it? So social conditionality takes the form of an administrative penalty for non-compliance with basic labor standards. It's the first provision ever in the CAP aimed at securing workers' rights. So they have to have sort of contracts and health and safety measures and a bunch of other things that I won't go into right now. So overall, in the EU, we have 8.7 million persons employed in EU agriculture, and that number is estimated to rise to 17 million when including informal workers. And of course, women are much more likely to be employed in informal agriculture. Therefore, in theory, it would be expected to improve the position of women and migrant women and create more data for more intersectional research. However, social conditionality is only for recipients of area-based payments, like the ones I've talked about, but farms receiving payments through operational programs are exempt. Now, I didn't cover operational programs in this paper because I don't have the time, but in practice, the European Commission organizes support for horticulture, for example, differently, with these farms receiving few direct payments. This means that the policy is expected to have a limited effect on the fruit and vegetable sector, as well as sectors such as wines, apiculture, and olive oil. And this is significant given that these sectors are the ones that depend most on migrant and seasonal labor. So, it's this great measure, but it actually doesn't apply where it should most apply. Next, another issue could be that the capacity, it relies heavily on the capacity of member states to monitor it, and therefore depends on existing national mechanisms, which, vary a lot between member states and might lag behind in some. And others have noted that the level of sanctions decided at the national level are too low to induce significant change. Also, it was introduced in 2023, but only on a voluntary basis, and actually only since this year, 2025, it's mandatory for all the states. But then what this means is that there's not enough time until the next cap to actually, integrate findings from the assessments into the next cap, because the only assessment can be done in 2026, the first one, and that's a bit too late. So to move on to the discussion and some conclusions. So the CAP is a gendered institution. And why is this claim important? A commitment to gender mainstreaming that limits itself to rhetoric is not only unhelpful, but it can also be harmful. And this is because it shuts down debates by sustaining the illusion that the problem is being addressed. Gender equality is included in the CAP, we're done. But that's not the case. So what we want to show with our work is that we want to keep the debate around gender in agriculture open and vivid. And we also want to open up new avenues for interrogating the dynamics of power and offer entry points both to research but also to advocacy to those who want to influence these institutions. So the few provisions in the CAP that do target women specifically, if you remember those rules about gender at the beginning, are not obligatory or focus merely on data collection and monitoring. So measuring gender rather than doing gender. The CAP also assumes that gender equals woman and woman equals homogeneous, but that stops the CAP from being intersectional. So, for example, think of migrant women. And then I'm reminded a bit of something that somebody said, I can't remember, in our last SWIFT meeting in Geneva, that diversity has always been out there, and it's not about supporting diversity. It's about not having policies that actively discriminate against such diversities. They're not weak. They don't need to be helped. They just need to, have an equal footing. So questions can be raised even about the sexist aggregated data that is being collected. For example, how relevant is it? There's another regulation that dictates what data is to be collected on farm labor, and they explicitly exclude housework from there. So overall, CAP interventions produce gender effects that are not accounted for. So I forgot I had this picture in. It's a picture of what the EU sees women farmers to look like. So white, not migrant, young. So through the systematic identification of contradictions within the CAP, which lead to potential structural obstacles for women farmers, we show the ways in which the CAP shapes behavior in repetitive and different, depending on gender, ways. That the CAP no longer explicitly assumes a farmer to be a man does not mean that it is inclusive. An analysis suggests that persistence of structural obstacles. So, the inclusion of gender resembles institutional layering more than gender mainstreaming, is what we think. And what I mean by institutional layering is that this new component of, gender equality is added onto a very old and pre-existing framework, but without really interrogating the ways that these two elements interact. This new element interacts with the remainder of the policy, and that's what I hope to have shown a little bit with this presentation. So there is a clash between the stated policy intention and policy practice, and the EU should be held accountable for it. And this brings me to my last slide, which is the policy recommendations. So if gender is to be mainstreamed into the CAP, we would need to make gender equality its own CAP objective, to recognize that sex and gender disaggregated data is a means and not an end to gender equality. So, you might be collecting some data, but also please integrate it into the policy. Furthermore, to ensure not just the quality and relevance of data, but also its integration into the policy. To introduce more CAP indicators that better capture gender differences. Wherever there's an indicator measuring number of farms/persons benefiting from any type of payment, it should be supported by gender disaggregated data, something which is currently not done. The CAP would also need to take into account structural inequalities underlying access to subsidies. Next, we recommend that an observatory should be established to monitor social conditionality to ensure that this actually, pretty progressive innovation functions to protect agriculture workers and is actually implemented. Member states also need to ensure diverse representation across the approved advisors providing advisory services and hard quotas to ensure that all committees related to CAP processes reach gender parity. And this was my presentation. I hope I was not speaking too fast. And this is my email. I don't know. I'll maybe stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Georgia. Yeah, so if you'd like to get in touch with Georgia about anything,
I'll write it in the chat.
You can. Thank you so much. Yeah, if you have any questions, just pop them in the chat. And also just so we don't get confused between whose question it is, could you just address your questions to directly to the speaker? So if you have a question for Georgia, just say question to Georgia. Thank you so much. We can jump to Elena, I think.
Well, actually, to Raquel and Elena, do you hear me well?
Perfectly. Thank
I
you.
hope the slides move forward. If not, please let me know. So, thank you all for joining us in this webinar. I am Raquel Luján. I'm a researcher at the Center for Knowledge Management and Innovation from the Spanish Council of Scientific Research. And together with my colleague Elena Alter, today we will show you an overview of agroecology definitions being used in Europe, placing more focus on the one posed by social movements, and also we will give you an overview on the narratives from different European social movements with regard to women's rights and gender equity. Let's see if it passes. No. Do you see it moves, right? Like just to be sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so nowadays agroecology is a widespread concept. It has evolved since it was firstly coined as a scientific discipline in 1930. Today it encompasses different manifestations. As we understand today, agroecology is an holistic concept that encompasses agroecology as a science, as a set of practices and a social movement. And also lately, the political dimension of agroecology has emerged, mostly thanks to the activities developed by social movements that link the concept of agroecology to the objective to reach food sovereignty. Also, the scales have widened from agroecology being applied to the plot and field scale to encompassing the whole agri-food system. And also the principles have evolved from merely including agricultural and environmental principles to also integrate socioeconomic, cultural and political principles. But if we focus on agroecology as a social movement, mostly focusing in the European context, we see that along the 12th century until nowadays, the number of initiatives that form agroecology as a social movement has increased exponentially. Mostly if we pay attention to the last 20 or 30 years, we see that there are several initiatives that have emerged. And with this momentum that agroecology has gained, also we have seen that there is a co-option of the term. So during the last 10 to 15 years, that there have been several efforts by different organizations and agroecology practitioners to reach consensual definitions of agroecology. We see that there are three main definitions being used in the European context, but also globally, which are the definition proposed by FAO, which articulates agroecology in 10 principles, the definition posed by organized social movements that was coined in the Nieleni Forum held in Mali in 2015, that articulates agroecology in 13 principles. And besides this forum being an attempt to scale up agroecology and to avoid greenwashing, it was also a reaction to the politicization of the term that the social movements perceive agroecology was experienced, no? And the last or the newest agroecology definition is the one posed by the high-level panel of experts from the Committee of Food Security, which is based on previous definitions of agroecology and on expert consultation, and articulates the agroecology definition following certain principles. If we take as a reference the framework presented by Stephen Gleesman, which considers there are like 5 levels for food system transformation, no? The 3 first levels refer to the agroecosystem transformation, and the level 4 and level 5 refer more to food system transformation, to more socioeconomic and political principles. If we compare the definitions posed by the FAO and by the high-level panel of experts and the Nieleni definition posed by social movements, we see that at agroecosystem transformation levels, beyond the number of principles, the 3 definitions share or have in common that they pose that the practices, the agroecological farming practices, should promote ecological functions. They depict different numbers of principles, but the common understanding is that there is one main difference, that the Nieleni definition explicitly excludes the use of GMOs, the use of artificial hormones and agrochemicals and agrotoxics as techniques compatible with agroecology. No? If we focus at food system level, we see the FAO presents 5 principles, the high-level panel of experts presents 6 principles, and the social movements in the Nieleni definition presents 9 principles. We see that also these 3 definitions have many principles in common, such as the need to change the market system, no? The economic market system, and relocalize markets based on the principles of responsible consumption and production, solidarity, etc. We also see that they all claim the need for responsible participation and governance. But we see also there are some difference, mostly that the Nieleni definition places great emphasis on sociopolitical aspects of agroecology. Also, that it emphasizes the crucial role that social movements have in advancing agroecology. Is the only one that really mentioned the needs to challenge and transform power structures and corporate control of agri-food systems, and it places explicitly a great focus on the key role of women and youth in promoting agroecology. And as an example, we have here the European Coordination of Via Campesina, which is a social movement that integrates different organizations, more than 28 operating in different countries, and that have 2 different working groups explicitly addressing women's rights and gender and sexual diversities. Here I give pass to my colleague Elena.
Yeah, thank you, Raquel. Yeah, based on this first step of the research on like looking a bit more closely on who are actually the actors in the agroecological movement or initiatives we have in Europe. We did a narrative analysis of social movements in Europe that are supporting agroecology, and I will shortly present a bit what we have done in this research. So first of all, a few words on our methodological approach. What we did was basically we did a search, a selection, and analysis of a total of 137 gray literature documents from social movements, which mean this could be a report, it could be a manifesto, it could be even a press release, depending on how we considered what is relevant. And then we did a text-based framing analysis supported by in vivo analysis software. The framing analysis which we used had three main elements, which is on the one hand the diagnostic framing, which is more the identification of the problem and the attribution of causalities. The second is the prognostic framing. This is where they where narratives propose solutions to identified problems and also somehow the indication of some strategies or tactics or goals. And then there's the third part, which is rather the motivational framing, and this is an indication of actions. And if you see on the right-hand side, you see the table, and basically this is the table resuming the deductive codes we generated in beforehand. So these were the codes we used to start analyzing the documents. So state-of-the-art, objectives, threats, impacts, enabling conditions, disabling conditions, and requests, demands, and proposals. So always related to a specific topic we identified. So you can go to the next slide. So what we first identified were the topics and themes social movements are working on. These are in broad terms biodiversity, climate change, and socioeconomic resilience. And then by skimming through the as a first step, like skimming through the documents, we identified different subtopics. And we then sorted the various documents into subgroups, and the subgroups you can see in the smaller bubbles, which with the numbers. Even though, as you can imagine, it's sometimes difficult because they often address different topics or overlap. So, of course, for instance, a lot of like peasant rights or seed systems is also really much related to gender, and something that also popped up there when we analyzed these documents. But we did like this classification. And since we focus on gender, I will only look at the narrative from gender justice and equality. Here we found that social movements work and advocate on different issues, and we can and these can be resumed under these four main topics, which are in the little box, which are gender, sexual, identity-based violence, structural discrimination in the farming sector and policies, as we heard in the presentation of Georgia. Role of women in preserving traditional knowledge and biodiversity, and women's leadership in contesting capitalist and patriarchal structures. So if we go to the next slide, yeah, perfect. In the framework of these topics, we identified 6 counter narratives. Just to say, we talk of counter narratives because we analyze them somehow as a response of those agroecological social movements to dominant narratives of, as we defined it, as either the agro-industry or other powerful actors, which could be, for instance, the state, no, or the European Union. And those actors, those powerful actors, are usually shaping the normative framework of the industrialized agri-food system, and also, of course, try to uphold it by spreading their narratives. So what we identified were the counter narratives of the which posed the social movements. And I will now shortly present only three counter narratives, which are here in bold. The first counter narrative is that female farmers are still structurally disadvantaged when it comes to heritage, land ownership, financial autonomy, and political participation. And here the social movements analyzed and argued that public policies, laws, and family businesses are still based on patriarchal structures that perpetuate a clear gender division of labor and do not acknowledge women as producers and decision makers. For instance, women, as we heard very well in the former presentation, women run smaller farms generally and receive no or very little area-based subsidies from the CAP, while at the same time they are being subject also to legal requirements that are similar to those of large farms. So basically they have to make the same paperwork as large farms, but with much lesser resources. And also social movements state that women are still highly underrepresented in decision-making and organizational roles. Their skills, opinions, and specific needs are not recognized, and they are also not represented especially in these traditional agricultural organizations, which depending on the country could be a farmers organization or farmers union. Depending on how they are organized in national states. And it was really interesting because some social movements analyzed also even documents from these organizations and found that, for instance, there's no gender inclusive language and there's even no visual representation in their materials or communication. The second counter narrative we found is in rural areas, farmers with a gender or sexual identity not falling within the cis heteropatriarchy are subject to discrimination, exclusion, social judgment, and aggression. So here, this is, I think, is like the documents we analyzed were more or less recent, like from the last 2 years. So it's a topic which is only rising at the moment and touched by or social movements are working on it like for a while. But as I said, the documents are quite recent, and social movements claim that traditional notions of family and community often are associated to this heterosexual family farms. So they are still prevalent in rural areas and the political and also at the political administrative level. And usually at these levels, they represent the social unit that is also supported by laws and subsidies. So if you don't fall into this imaginary, which is like established in laws and policies, for instance, it's more difficult to acquire subsidies, etc. And the agricultural
Sorry, Elena. We need to start wrapping up this part.
Okay, yeah, I will finish this one. And the agricultural sector and the educational system in Europe continues to be not male-dominated, also with a few female farmers or non-binary or almost no non-binary role models. And finally, the LGBTQI community in rural areas report on that they are suffering from discrimination, marginalization, social judgment, also invisibilization and aggression, heightening feeling of isolation and mental health problems. And as you can imagine, makes it not really attractive to this community to enter the farming sector. And I finish with the strategies and demands we identified for every section. So here, a key point is these are only the headers. So it's a bit general, but one point is building alliances and collective action between women and other groups working for gender and equality in different movements and organizations. Second, the recognition, fair sharing, and payment of care and reproductive work. And finally, public policies that need to mitigate the disadvantaged situation of women and the queer community. And that's how we end. Thank you.
Thank you, Raquel and Elena. Thank you for that presentation. Let's jump to Cecilia, if we can.
Yes, thanks a lot, Chileg and everyone for this opportunity. So I would like to share some ongoing work regarding the development and use of indicators to include gender in the assessment of agroecological transitions. And this is work that is taking place in the context of the Agroecology-TRANSECT project. So as Marta already explained at the beginning of this webinar, one of the key aims of this project is to contribute to advancing an agroecological transition in 11 different innovation hubs in Europe. And one of the research lines that we're pursuing in this project in contribution to this goal is to develop a multi-criteria assessment tool. And the aim of this tool is, on the one hand, to identify which agroecological principles and practices are farms engaging with in each of these innovation hubs, but perhaps more importantly, also what are the on-farm impacts of this engagement. And the hope is that this information can provide actionable knowledge to each of these innovation hubs, on the one hand, by perhaps identifying blind spots in engagement with agroecological principles that can present opportunities for new interventions, but also by identifying some of the benefits of agroecology so that these benefits, which are quantified, can be communicated to other farmers and to policymakers. So how did we go about constructing this tool and this tool to be able to identify these impacts? So on the one hand, these involved quite conceptual discussions on what should agroecology deliver on, so the definition of evaluation criteria. And on the other hand, it also involved quite a technical discussion on how can we measure these contributions, so through which indicators. So because the ambition of the tool was to contribute actionable insights to each of these 11 innovation hubs, these two topics were discussed primarily between researchers in the project, both involved directly in the innovation hubs, but also outside of these innovation hubs. And these discussions took place within 3 so-called co-innovation workshops throughout the first 2 years of the project. At the same time, we also wanted to reconcile these local perspectives with some established frameworks in agroecology. So, for example, we tried to align with the 13 principles of agroecology brought forward by the HLPE. And in the definition of indicators, we also tried to not reinvent the wheel, since already a number of tools exist which have tried to measure the impacts of agroecology through the development of indicators. So we conducted a review of these tools to see whether some of these indicators were relevant to our context as well and could be used. So what we found throughout this process is that agroecology's ambition to contribute to greater gender equity was identified both by these local innovation hubs, but it's also present partly in some of these established frameworks in agroecology. We identified 13 existing tools which aim to evaluate agroecological impacts, and in 5 of those we found an explicit reference to quantifying contributions to greater gender equity and women's empowerment. These are tools that for the most part have been developed by international agricultural development organizations. And what we can see is that for the most part, these tools try to measure similar aspects of gender equity and women's empowerment. So they each aim to quantify whether there's gender parity in terms of decision-making on the farm. So this is in terms of decisions on more technical decisions on agroecosystem management. They also each aim to identify whether there are differences in terms of division of labor based on gender on the farms. Some tools try to go a bit deeper to also identify whether there's differences in terms of satisfaction with the workplace, so a more qualitative dimension. And other tools also aim to differentiate division of labor, not just in terms of farm labor, but also in terms of housework and care work. Another dimension that they all look at was whether there are differences in terms of genders, in terms of participation in social organizational spaces, for example, cooperatives or farmer unions. And the last dimension aimed to identify whether there are differences in terms of availability of income, but also assets such as land ownership or land rights. So in the tool that we developed, we aim to build on some of these existing dimensions, and we aim to focus more specifically on this dimension of gendered division of labor, since this was identified as the most relevant by the innovation hubs in our project. We also identified 2 optional indicators that are only implemented in a subset of innovation hubs. So these look at participation of women in community spaces, but also in the leadership of these community spaces. And the second optional indicator aimed to understand whether women's involvement in agroecological labor and decision-making had specific impacts. So with regards to the division of labor indicator, this is a composite indicator. So we tried to identify whether there were gender gaps in terms of farm working hours, but also unpaid farm work. Also differences in terms of farm ownership or farm management positions. And then we had an open question where we tried to identify what are some of these different tasks that are maybe taken up more often by women or men. And then the other 2 optional questions were also just open questions. So to try and identify whether there's a diversity of understandings in terms of contribution to community leadership and the impacts of women involvement in decision making. So the data collection is still wrapping up in the 11 innovation hubs. So for now, we really just have some preliminary results, which still need to be discussed and interpreted and validated. So here I'm showcasing some results from 2 innovation hubs in Switzerland and in Bulgaria. In Bulgaria, we worked with STEP. This is the Association for Territorial and Environmental Prosperity. Whereas in Switzerland, we are working with Agroscope and AGFF. This is a working group on the promotion of fodder production. And so together we're starting to analyze some of these results, and we can see some patterns emerging. So a first finding is that in terms of gender parity in working hours, about half of the farms sampled see relatively high levels of gender parity. We're not really seeing a gender trend in terms of unpaid labor relying more often on women. This is partly also because we didn't find many farms which had volunteer labor. What we did find was that there is quite a limited share of women that are the main owners of the farms, or the main managers of the farms. In Switzerland, there's quite a few farms where there's 50% ownership between men and women, but there's no farm where a majority of owners or associates are women. And in Bulgaria, we were also able to quantify whether there's a perception by farmers that tasks vary based on gender. And here we found that most farmers did have this perception of differences. So we tried to dig a bit deeper in what some of these differences are. And what we found in Bulgaria is that more often women are involved in so-called lighter work. So the use of specialized machinery more often depends on men. We also found that more often women are involved in taking care of animals, for example, through sheep herding. We had a hypothesis that women would more often be involved in administrative work. However, we found this was not necessarily the case. In some farms, this also is a work that is taken up by men. We also had some responses that in general, there's a perception that more work is done by women. And as we saw in the previous slide, there was also a couple of farmers that didn't perceive there to be any differences in responsibilities. In the Swiss case, we found some similar trends. So this idea of more physically demanding work being done by men was also identified in Switzerland. However, we also found were some perceptions that women tend to contribute more to work that is seen as more socially, ecologically, or emotionally involved, for example, for animal welfare. Perhaps unsurprisingly, we found that also women tend to be more often responsible for household and care work. And in Switzerland as well, we found some participants that didn't feel that there were strong task divisions between men and women. And I think what's also key to mention in relation to the interpretation of this work is that there were few women respondents. So in Bulgaria, 2 of the respondents were women. These were the same women that are also owners of the farms. Whereas in Switzerland, we also just had 3 women respondents. So to some extent, what we're showcasing on the slide are also the perceptions of, for the most part, men on how tasks are divided based on gender on the farms. And what's maybe nice to mention is also that in the project, we've done now a first data collection round, and we're hoping to do a second round next year. And so in between these 2 rounds, there's also an opportunity to, of course, interpret these results and also see whether some adjustments need to be made in terms of how these indicators are calculated, but also in terms of how the data collection takes place. So there's opportunities, for example, to ensure that questions related to gender are perhaps answered by women that are present on the farm. And then, yeah, just a few insights regarding to these two other optional questions. These are insights that come from the Bulgarian Innovation Hubs. So in terms of the perceptions on the role of women in the community, here too, there was a perception, well, there was quite a strong agreement on the perceptions that women are key when it comes to festivals and fairs and when it comes to traditional agricultural activities, for example, related to cheese production. And when it came to the indicator looking at what is the perceived impact of women's involvement in agroecological labor and decision making, perceptions seem to agree on the fact that more often if women are involved in this decision making, we have greater environmental or sustainability impacts in the broad sense. But there were also some farms which claimed that, well, in their view, if a farm is agroecological, this tends to be quite a strong vision that's on the farm, and this tends to be a vision that's shared by all members of the farm, and that this is a less gendered aspect. Yeah, so these are just some of our preliminary findings, but yeah, thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you, Cecilia. If you have any questions, pop them in the chat. Yeah, I think we can jump to you, Judith,
Yeah, I'm
if you're
going to start
ready.
sharing my screen.
Yeah.
Can you see it?
Not yet. I can see it. It's not in presenter mode.
No, yeah, sorry. I just wanted to make sure that. Okay. So I'm Judith. Like many of us today, I work in Ingenio, and I work in this. My work is focused on the SWIFT project, especially on work package 4, which aims to generally to assess the viability of small agroecological farms from a feminist perspective. So in this presentation, we working on it with Marina and Marta. We wanted to share a snippet of what we do in Work Package 4, particularly focusing on our methodological approach in the context of this reframing of farm viability from both a feminist and agroecology perspective. So, sorry, it's not letting, there we go. So taking a step back to our starting point for Work Package 4 is the need, our starting point is the need to rethink the understanding of viability, how we define it. So we understand that conventional definitions of viability are
Judith, we
insufficient.
cannot see you advance the slides. You are still in the first one. Maybe because you are sharing not the full screen.
Okay, let me try that.
Yeah.
Can you see now if I change?
Yes, it's perfect now.
Thanks. Yeah, so our starting point is the idea, the understanding that conventional definitions of viability that focus on a monetary or just productive understanding of the economy are insufficient, are not able to explain how agroecological farms work, how they are able to reproduce and sustain themselves, because according to these conventional definitions, these farms shouldn't exist anymore. They are considered unviable. So from this, our hypothesis or our approach is that bringing in a perspective from feminist economics in which the life is placed at the center of socioeconomic activities instead of profit, instead of capital, we can provide a more holistic and comprehensive definition of viability that provides a broader framework to incorporate reproductive work into the viability concept, and then it's better suited to examine and understand agroecological farms. So the base of our working in Work Package 4 in SWIFT are the 12 women-led innovations and the fieldwork we did with them. We had 12 case studies in 3 different regions in Spain. As you can see on the map with the logos, they have different productions. Some of them are dairy. A lot of them are focused on vegetable productions, other on fruit trees, and some others have goat, sheep, or cows. In terms of like fieldwork methodologies, we started with interviews to characterize these farms based not only on production, but also on how their social structure, the resources they have available. And then our colleagues, they did 2 weeks of participant observation per farm. These 2 weeks separated in 2 different seasons to see if there were any difference between low and more like high demanding seasons. And this participant observation was done in cohabitation with the farmers. So the researchers not only shared in the farm work, in the exclusive like agriculture work, but they lived with the farmers and their families during the days they were there. So how do we apply or actualize a feminist agroecological approach into the research methodology, right? We focused on 3 main methods: extensive task observation, tracking the use of time, and creating participatory spaces shared between farmers and researchers. Well, these first 2 methods, extensive task observation and tracking the use of times, were mostly performed during the fieldwork weeks, although they continue in the analysis. The participatory approach extends throughout all phases of the project. It's like it's an ongoing methodology. So, extensive task observation. We call it extensive in the sense that both reproductive and productive tasks were observed, breaking this conventional boundary. As we take a feminist approach and we consider this reproductive sphere as important as the productive dimensions for farm viability. We observed who does the tasks, when are they done, where do they take place, like in the farm, outside the farm, on the roads, their frequency, like whether there are like flexible tasks that can be done either by different members of the farm or in different times, and the satisfaction related to the performance of the tasks, like in a cost benefit analysis, but of course not only like monetary cost benefit, right, but also like considering things such as arduousness or like farmers' values or their impact into the farm. This type of task observation gave us an insight into the project's internal organization, how farmers organize their work within the farm, and allowed us to identify the viability strategies that they implement. Similarly, in the sense of breaking the boundary between reproductive and productive spheres, in tracking the use of time, fieldwork researchers kept an hourly record of how farmers used their time during the 2 fieldwork weeks. So they kept a record, like each hour of the day, what the different members of the farm were doing, including as well basic needs, like for example, sleeping, eating, things like that. With these, we gathered data on farmers' workload and task distribution based on, for example, like gender. In these graphs, you can see, for example, in this first one, like with the pyramids of sorts, you can see, like, for example, each color is a member of the farm project, and you can see how many hours are dedicated to the different tasks. I know that the quality is not great, right? But with the pyramid with more colors would indicate a task that is flexible in terms of how many members of the farm can do it. And like the higher the pyramid, the more hours are dedicated to that task. So that it also allows us to like assess like quantitatively like the impact of the different tasks into the farm and the farmer's workload. In the circular graph, we see, for example, this is like for one of the farm members, how their work is distributed. In one way, we see that for these member, like in blue, most of their tasks are dedicated to like farmland tasks. And the one in gray would be the tasks dedicated to processing, to transformation, right? And in this crazy looking graph, we wanted to visualize and quite like an insight that was the importance of task simultaneity, right? Which appeared as quite important in the different projects. So we would see how, for example, the blue tasks like gestión administrativa, like management tasks, are often done in simultaneity with different tasks in the farm. Finally, like I was saying, we take a participatory approach to both the project and the design for the methodology throughout all the phases of the project. That means that we are a transdisciplinary team within the agroecological movement that includes farmers, researchers, and we said farmers again, but farmers, researchers, and activists. When applying these methods and when designing fieldwork and their specifics like the dates, who is going where and everything, we really try to have a dialogue with farmers and try and adapt to the reality and the capacity of the research team, not only focusing on the data we wanted to gather or the research goals. Farmers are actively involved in the research projects. We try to give them feedback on the research results so they can validate them and like in an iterative process, right? In a dialogue between research and farmers. And often these participatory spaces take the form of workshops in which we share results, sometimes individual with each farmer, sometimes in each region. And like we also co-develop this feminist viability self-assessment tool that would be the end goal of work package 4. But also sometimes these participatory spaces can be newsletters or update meetings and stuff like that. Again, we try to adapt to the needs and to the changing schedules of both farmers and researchers. So thank you very much for your attention, and I think Marta, Marina can also like answer questions related to the working work package 4 as well as myself. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judith. Thank you. Yeah, so we had one more speaker today, a case study, Beatrix, but unfortunately she's in the mountains, so she cannot join today. She doesn't have any connection, but that's fine because this way we could go over time a little bit with the other speakers. So we have about 5 to 10 minutes for a couple of questions before we wrap up.
Yeah, I think I will prioritize if anyone has questions for Judith in the case that, there is no time maybe to answer. Or alternatively, if presenters want to what you already heard, no? And maybe write the questions for Judith in the chat, and then we can have this common cross reaction that actually I'm going to start with. So because listening to Carolina and the counter narratives and the narratives they found in the civil society organizations documents, I found it was very interesting that how in the SWIFT project some of these things have been already raised, no? In this definitely this responds also because of the transdisciplinary characteristics of the project, no? But the issue that in the content narratives that Elena was presenting in terms of the fact that still the common agricultural policy has a patriarchal framing and favors fish farms and all these kind of things have already been found also by Georgia in her analysis of the common agricultural policy, or this claim, no, that civil society movements are doing in terms of counting both productive and reproductive work So we can measure viability in a different way. That is the word that Judith has presented also as part of the project. So I think it is interesting to see these complementarities as well, no? And I think one of the things I wanted to, probably I'm going to ask, or maybe it's a comment from findings from Cecilia, it is the issue of this perception that the women participate in community spaces, no? And this, while what we find in the SWIFT project is that the participation of women in formal organizations, no representation in organizations to defend the rights of women is very low, no? And this is a classical debate about policy and politics, no? So there is also the fact that also let's say that women participate less in politics, like political parties and all these type of institutions, but they participate more in informal politics. So they are very much active in communities, they are very much active in the local sphere, while they are invisible in the formal politics. No? And I see this is also happening looking at Cecilia's findings in terms of participation in the community. So I don't know if Raquel, Elena, Georgia, Judith, Cecilia, you want to react to some of the presentations you already not your presentation, but the other presentations, no, from the colleagues.
If not, I do see. Thanks everybody for your questions. I see that the chat was very busy, and the speakers also responded quite extensively to the questions. So we don't have too many questions left unanswered, I think. But I did see something from Eleonora for Cecilia about the methodology used to create the indicators. Did you see that comment, Cecilia? Did you want to respond in
Yeah,
verbally?
I think I did. I hope it's sent through.
Oh,
but-
you did. Oh, yes, you did. All right. Okay, maybe we have one last question here from Natalie. Is it possible to specify with scientific disciplines which I'm guessing scientific disciplines are involved in the different works presented today? Anyone can jump in. I think this is the last question in the chat so far.
I mean, like the answer to this question, maybe like it's related to something I was thinking when Cecilia was presenting. I thought the frame was super interesting, but I was like, as you were speaking, I was thinking about the challenge of how to obtain the data that you need to fill in such complex indicators, right? And I feel like that's I mean, I think that's what we're trying to do, and we've I mean it's quite a challenge, right? Like you were like you want a very complex tool, right? Like very comprehensive indicators, and then the challenge is like, okay, how do I go beyond like what Marta was saying on the chat, right? Like bias, like maybe I need to spend like maybe I need ethnographic research, right? Maybe I need like an ethnographic approach, spending time, but then that requires yeah, a lot of time and emotional involvement, and then you might not need like the amount of data that a more quantitative approach would give you, like, right, for like more like of a global like a visualization, right, to like get a more like a global picture of the issue. So for me that was a challenge that I kept on like going on in my brain when Cecilia was speaking, like that the framework is amazing, it's super interesting, but yeah, how do we collect, do we gather in a way that does justice to the complexity of the framework itself. So
Yeah. Thank you, Judith. You're very right, and it's also a challenge that we face in the project. And I think today has also been very useful for us to take stock on, yeah, how we can improve this tool, both from a data collection process, but from the indicators themselves. And I think it's also partly a danger of, yeah, we try to use existing indicators to try not to reinvent the wheel, but these are also indicators that have, for the most part, been around since, I think, 2012 or so. So there's also a lot of improvement there to try and go further with what we're measuring. And I think partly this does also relate to this idea of the different disciplines involved in our project. So a lot of the innovation hubs involved in our project are also involving agronomists or ecologists, are focused more on the field scale rather than the community level. And so I think this is also a reflection of who has been involved in this process itself. But yeah, we really have this philosophy of iteration and improvement, and so I think we can take stock of what others have shared today and make refinements as well as we go on in the project. We have about 2 years left, so yeah, thank you.
Any other questions or said? I mean, we have 1 minute left, but I would really like to see if any of the presenters want to engage in the conversation with the other presentations, like Judith and Cecilia did now. If not, it's not a problem, eh? Meanwhile, I can answer Ilaria. So Ilaria, definitely. We published an article basically on that. You can find, I can send the link to the article there. We look at this in particular, the different role of men and women in the selection conservation.
If there are no more questions, I will wrap up.